Hey guys, welcome back to Coach All Right. So for this video, we're going to be talking about different things that students need to consider as you figure out which testing method you want to use for your 2020 AP exams. Before we jump into the considerations, let's just recap what we know about the 2020 AP exams as of this point. So they're going to be done at home. The exam is going to be about 45 minutes long, and the exam is going to be a free response question or questions. So for AP Lang and AP Lit, you're doing question 2 for your respective test. And also there are new testing dates and times, so just be mindful of that. The College Board has released a schedule and it's dependent on your time zone. Students who are in multiple AP classes need to be aware of the parameters of each of their different tests. So for example, for AP Lang, you might choose to handwrite your exam and take a picture with your phone to upload it. But if you're also in AP Bio, you might decide that you want to type your essays for that exam. So you don't have to actually do the same testing method across all of your AP exams. You can select the one that is most efficient and most appropriate for your needs for that test. The first thing that students need to do is a device inventory. So you know that you can actually take the exam by handwriting it and taking a picture with your phone, but you also want to be aware of which devices you have access to, and this is going to depend on your situation, so it's going to be different for everybody. But here are some options, so you need to be aware of which devices you have on hand or will have on hand the day of the test so that you know what your options actually are. Once you have figured out the devices that you have access to, you need to ask yourself if you share these devices with anyone. I know a lot of you might have siblings at home who are also doing distance learning, or maybe your parents are working from home and they might need the device as well. So it's going to be very important that you communicate your testing schedule with your family members if you are sharing devices with them, because you don't want to be competing for device time the day of the test. Let's say that after doing your device inventory, you realize that you'd be better suited taking the test on a device you don't have. Here are a couple options that you can pursue. Let's say you need a Chromebook, for instance. A lot of schools are actually lending out devices to their students in this time of need, so you could contact your school, specifically your AP teacher or AP coordinator, and they might be able to get you a device for the day of your exam. Another thing to do might be to contact a friend. Now, obviously, please be safe during this time and practice social distancing and take whatever precautions are needed. The other option would be to contact the College Board. They have a form on their website for students who are experiencing technology problems. Because of the time constraints of the test, it's going to be very important that you choose a method that is most efficient for your test-taking style. So there are some things that you need to consider. One of the things would be the screen size. So are you going to be able to read the prompt well on your phone screen, if that's one of your options, or your tablet? Another thing would be to consider your typing speed. So some students might be better served handwriting it if they don't type well. So that would be something to consider. You need to remember, though, that you have to access the test and submit the test from the same device. You can't just share it to another device, unfortunately, because of testing protocols and security. So keep that in mind as you select your device as well. But one thing to keep in mind, too, is that AP readers don't care whether you handwrite it or type it. Another thing is, if you're going to do it on your phone, make sure that when you're typing on your phone that you're actually very mindful of which keys you're hitting, because sometimes kids spell things wrong or they don't use the right punctuation, and it can make it really difficult to read. So you need to keep these things in mind, but don't worry about what the reader wants. Your AP reader just wants you to do what is most effective for you. So if that means handwriting it, awesome. If that means typing it, awesome. But don't think that type tests are going to be favored over handwritten ones. That's absolutely not the case. Okay, now we need to start talking tech, because one of the biggest fears I think students have is that they're going to have technology problems the day of the exam. So at this time, we don't know exactly what these tests are going to look like. I assume they're going to use a platform similar to what AP Classroom looks like, but we don't know. We'll find that out at the end of the month. And so these are just kind of things I would think students might need to worry about, but we'll know a little bit more at the end of the month, so just bear with me on this. What I would do is I would actually figure out the weekday that your test is. So for AP Lang, it would be a Wednesday. Figure out the time of the test for your time zone and figure out how good your internet is during that time. If it's really slow, you might want to ask people in your house to get off the Wi-Fi for a little bit and see if it actually picks up a little bit, because if the internet is really slow, that could potentially be problematic for you the day of the test. Not totally sure, but I would want to know that in advance if it was me. Another thing would be, if you're going to be using your phone a lot, you might want to actually look up your data plan and your data usage if you don't have an unlimited plan, because you don't want to run out of data before the test. So we don't really know how the phone situation is going to work just yet. So I would just be cautious of that leading into the May dates. This next tip is coming from recent personal experience of mine. My computer was running really, really slowly, and it was really frustrating because it was taking me a long time to do the task that I needed to do. And so if this was happening to me on the day of an AP exam, I would have been very, very stressed out. So here are my recommendations of things you need to consider if you're doing it on either a Chromebook or a laptop or desktop computer. You need to optimize your device. So one of the things is to look at your settings, because sometimes apps or different programs open up automatically. I know for me, Skype was opening up automatically, and it was really slowing down my computer as I would power it on. And so that would be something to look for. Also, you can clean your computer. So I went through and deleted everything in my trash. I went through and kind of got rid of old files and just went through a bunch of different things to try to make it faster. And it did sort of work. So I'm not an expert on that, but it did help me. So I'm going to give you guys that tip as well. And then you also want to think about updates. If your computer is due for an update, you want to make sure that you do that well before the test. That way everything is running as smoothly as possible. At the time I'm recording this, the College Board has not yet released its simulations or tutorials, but I know that a lot of students want to practice and teachers want to be able to help their students practice, so I have a few suggestions that might be useful. The first is, if you don't know which method you're going to do, make sure you practice both typing and handwriting for the exam. So one thing to do with typing is to actually try to create a split screen by opening up two different windows and doing it side by side or even vertically to try to simulate the fact that there would be a passage and a text box, because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but you could at least try to practice those two configurations. Now for handwriting, you want to actually practice taking pictures with your phone, because we're not really sure if you're going to be able to use any kind of outside scanning apps or not. I would assume not. So make sure that you can actually figure out how to not have a shadow, figure out which type of ink you need and which paper works best. So those are some tips for that. Now let's talk about handwriting for a second, because sometimes handwritten essays are a little bit difficult to read. And so one tip I have for you is to actually practice writing in all caps if your handwriting is really, really difficult to read. If your handwriting is legible, don't worry about that tip. But that was a tip that actually helped one of my students, and other teachers, not just me, noticed that his handwriting improved when he did that. So another thing to consider is that you need to have plenty of paper on hand and also pens that work. So it doesn't necessarily have to be notebook paper, it can be copy paper, but whatever it is that you need, make sure you have those supplies at the ready the day of the test. The next thing is to have a backup plan. This is going to be very important because things can go wrong, and so you want to have plan A and plan B. And so there's always the option of handwriting it if that is your plan B. So make sure that you know what you're going to do if your device fails before the test. Like let's say it won't turn on the day of the test, you need to have a backup plan. So now for practicing, figure out what your plan A is and figure out what your plan B is, and practice both of those methods at least once or twice before the exam. And then the other thing is, like I said, to practice on the weekday and at the time of the exam. You also want to practice annotating on a separate piece of paper. I've actually recently done a video about this, so I will link it here. And also another thing would be to find a really good testing area in your house where you can have a good surface to work on and where it's going to be quiet, because you need to know where you're actually taking the test in your house. Make sure you guys follow the College Board on their social media. Any of their big announcements, I will do a video about here as well. Now let me give you guys a couple of test day reminders just in case these are things that you hadn't already thought of. So one thing is to set alarms, but make sure you actually have multiple alarms set to remind you about the test. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb if you're not going to use it for the exam, because you don't want any kind of notifications coming that will distract you. Make sure your device is charged. Make sure you turn your device on at least 30 to 60 minutes before your actual test. That way it does have time to start up. Remember, we talked about optimizing your device. Have extra paper on hand. Even if you're typing, you need extra paper. Make sure you have plenty of paper. You don't want to have to stop and go get paper. That would be terrible. You'd be wasting time. And make sure that you have a place where you can be reasonably comfortable. Do you have a desk, a kitchen table? Are you going to sit on the floor with your Chromebook? What are you going to do? How are you going to test in a way that is effective for you? So think about those things and practice those things as you are preparing for the exam. A few of you mentioned in one of my recent videos that you might actually be able to take pictures on your Chromebook instead. We're still waiting to see if the College Board mentions this as a viable option, but thank you guys for the tip. If you have more tips, leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up so that other AP teachers and students know that it's helpful. Until next time, guys, happy writing!